Today I'm going to let you know which Krampus movies are worth watching and which are best left ignored. With that said, definitely check out the Krampus evolution on Animated after this ranking. It's probably one of the most interesting horror evolutions. Now just remember, this ranking is just my opinion. I'd love to hear your opinions down below. And with that said, let's get to it from worst to best. And coming in last place is Sister Krampus. Now this is one of the more recent offerings of Krampus movies, and I was sort of looking forward to it. The poster looked pretty fun, and I had to actually buy it on iTunes because I couldn't find it anywhere else. Yeah, it was not worth it. I think I paid like 10 bucks, and it's probably not even worth like 10 cents. The acting's poor, it's shot poorly, and the Krampus suit itself is really bad. Like, it's just like a off-the-shelf costume that someone could buy, maybe for like 80 bucks or something. Like, it is low budget through and through. The tone of the movie is like, kind of goes from like trying to be super serious to like, then it's all of a sudden a comedy, and it doesn't really work. So yeah, I definitely say skip this one. And coming in 14th is Bigfoot vs. Krampus. This is also a newer release, and yeah, I also had to buy this one, and it was also really bad. And I'm not sure if this movie is even supposed to be live action or if it's supposed to be animated, because it uses live action clips, but for the bulk of the movie it is like 3D kind of video game looking graphics. So I'm not sure like if they're trying to make it seem like it's actually live action or not, but it's just really bad. The animation itself is really bad, and like, I'm an animator, so I'm gonna look at animation and judge it really harshly. And this one almost made last place. Literally, the film has like voiceover for every character, and like you almost don't see the lip sync for most characters except for maybe Bigfoot. Everybody else like wears a helmet for the most part, makes it probably a lot easier for them. The main girl in it, she would talk, and then all of a sudden her voice would change, and it would be like really poor audio all of a sudden. So I was like, oh, did they leave in a temp audio for that part? There was like 3 or 4 times where it did that. I've never watched a movie where it used temp audio all of a sudden. And yeah, just like for the premise alone, Bigfoot versus Krampus, I was pretty excited. I was like, this is gonna be stupid fun. But it just ended up being stupid. They don't even fight. Like I think they talk smack to each other like once or twice, but then they don't ever like hit each other or anything. It's like, why was I watching this? This should have been like King Kong versus Krampus, but it was like Krampus flies around space and does nothing for forever. It wasn't good. And coming in unlucky number 13 is Mother Krampus 2, Sleigh Ride. Now this one does not actually feature Krampus, but then also the killer that it does feature is really bad and doesn't really seem to have any motivation, and just like kind of like is just doing things and doesn't really make any sense. And also the lead characters, there's one lead who I feel is kind of like an offensive stereotype of a drag queen. They probably could have done a little bit better with that. Just like, this is almost nearly unwatchable. The first beginning is like kind of somewhat interesting, like, oh, okay, where are they going to go with this? And then it just like grounds to a halt. And then the rest of the movie just stays in a halt. It's almost unbearable. And coming in 12th place is The Christmas Devil. Krampus, the Christmas Devil, that is. Yeah, this film is also really bad. The acting is bad, it's shot poorly, and the Krampus suit is pretty cheap looking. Like, I kind of like the skeletal face a little bit, but for the most part, it does not look good. And you can barely see it on camera. It's like they kind of know that doesn't look good, so they don't show it that much. The one thing that this film does have going for it, and I think this is why it's ranked above the previous 3, is that it kind of gets the Santa-Krampus dynamic a little bit more correct than a lot of these other movies where he's actually working together with him. Now, I think they made Santa just a little too evil as well here. Like, he seems to also enjoy the fact that Krampus is capturing kids and torturing them. Like, he's like really into it, and it's kind of weird. But it kind of gets the Santa-Krampus dynamic right, so it's a little bit higher on the list, although it's still a very much unwatchable film. And moving on to the next unwatchable film at number 11 is Krampus the Reckoning. Now this film, the acting is a little bit better in this, it's shot a little bit better, the editing itself is pretty bad again. But the thing that really drags this one down is the awful CGI. For some reason, this low-budget film thought they would be able to create a fully CGI Krampus and have it on film. Now the design of Krampus here isn't the worst, it doesn't really look like a goat, he's really bald, and I can see like they couldn't really make that into a suit. But for the most part, it's like, just make a Krampus in a suit that kind of looks like this. It would have made this film a lot better. To have something tangible on screen with the actors, like acting with them. The main girl here wasn't too bad, and the young girl here did a pretty good job. She was kind of supposed to be creepy, and there is a twist at the end of the movie which is like somewhat interesting, but for the most part the film does drag, mainly because of the pacing and the editing. So, you know, it's not the worst of the worst, but the CGI Krampus knocks it down a lot, and the editing knocks it down even more. And coming into the top 10, which is not saying much for this Krampus series, I suppose, is Krampus the Devil Returns, which is a sequel to Krampus the Christmas Devil from 2013. Now this film is marginally shot better, and the Krampus look here is more on screen and a bit better. The Santa here is even more deranged than the first movie, but for the most part, this film is a little bit better than the first one that the same team did, 3 years earlier. Now, is that saying that it's still a film that I would want to watch ever again? No. I never want to see this film again, ever. The acting is still awful. They have the main guy from the first one come back, and he's just the worst. The pacing is, again, really slow, although you do get to see, I believe the person who played Leatherface from Part 3 is in this as kind of like a mob boss or gang leader or something. So that's kind of interesting, but he's not really a good actor either, at least not in this film, and I've never seen anything other than Leatherface and this. But yeah, it's just, again, unwatchable for the most part. And coming at number 9 is Krampus Unleashed, which is pretty much another unwatchable Krampus film, but it's made by the same team who did Krampus the Reckoning, and they actually used a real suit here, which is bonus points for it, and the suit actually looks pretty good. Now, unfortunately, the Krampus itself is kind of just like this monster who's running around, doesn't really seem to have any actual goals. They don't really seem to use anything from the actual Krampus lore, and yeah, it's just kind of a poorly shot film, which is pretty much expected for any of these Krampuses in the first half of the list here, but it is marginally better than Krampus the Reckoning, which they did before, and is paced a little bit better as well. The acting is a little bit rough in some places, but some people are doing a pretty good job. A lot of these movies are kind of like watching a high school person make a film, and you're like, oh, that's pretty good, I wonder what they're going to do later on. But these people, I think, are in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s making these films, so it's well, I'm not really I wonder what they're going to do later on, because I'm well, they probably are at the peak of their filmmaking careers. So this kind of feels like that, where it's this is okay, and if it was made by someone who's never made a film before, I'd be okay, but yeah, it's just not really watchable. And coming in number 8, which I think is pretty much around the middle of the list now, is Krampus the Return. Now this one is very similar to Krampus Unleashed. The acting is actually a little bit better here, it's shot a little bit better, but again, it's another cheap movie, so it's not really well done. The suit here I think is actually worse than the previous film. I think the story and the pacing is a little bit better here. You get a little bit more from the characters, and there is a twist at the end which I think kind of somewhat works, although it's a little unclear what exactly is happening. Although I wouldn't really recommend watching this film itself, because it's still, again, not a well-made film. It's just, after watching so many bad films, that a film that's poorly made almost seems oh, that was okay. So yeah, if you're desperate for more Krampus stuff that you could do worse than Krampus the Return, I watched it for free on Tubi, so it's okay, but only by these standards here. And coming into lucky number 7 is Krampus Origins, which isn't an origin film to any film here in particular. It's just an origin to Krampus himself, and I guess this is the first time that Krampus ever attacked people, and it kind of takes place around one of the world wars. I can't remember, World War I or World War II or something, and then it ends up going to a private school or a boarding school for kids, and I'm gonna say it's a little bit better. The actual acting of the people here are good, but the Krampus itself doesn't really feel it's in this same film. I feel they only could afford to hire this bodybuilder guy to play Krampus for a day or two, so they shot all of his scenes. So no character really ever shares the screen with Krampus except for in 2 or 3 shots, and for that it looks it was just composited. With that said, the lead actress here is actually doing a pretty good job. A lot of the nuns at the boarding school do a pretty good job. The priest, I think, is a pretty funny character. He's a really bad alcoholic, and well, I guess that's not really that funny, but he's doing a pretty good job in the role. And some of the kids, I don't typically like kid acting, but some of it's okay. There is a couple of kids that I'm just how did this guy get this job? He's not doing a good job. This is actually a marginally more watchable film. This one might have also been on Tubi if you want to check it out. So it's not the worst of the worst, but it's not the best of the best. It's just painfully okay. And coming in 6th place is Mother Krampus, which is also a film that doesn't actually feature a real Krampus, but instead it focuses on the witch. I forget the name of the witch. It's like also based in some sort of like Christmas demon lore, and the witch comes in and like takes kids or something. And for the most part, this film is actually not horrible, especially compared to the, like Mother Krampus 2, which is way lower on this list. This film's actually shot pretty well. A lot of the acting is pretty good. The witch design itself is good. Some of the scares actually work. It's like somewhat effective. Now, where it kind of loses me is some of the casting is a little strange. Like the lead actress is doing actually a pretty good job in the role. Like I was like impressed after watching some of these films. I was like, this is actually pretty good acting. But the person who plays her husband feels like a frat boy. Like this person, like who was playing the lead actress, is like maybe like 35, if I had to guess her age or something like that. And her husband, who she's like going through like a divorce with in this film, is like 20. I'm like, how couldn't they find somebody like her age to act alongside her? This kid's supposed to be going through a divorce, and he looks like he could be playing her kid, possibly. It's weird. So it kind of like takes me out a little bit, but some of the scares work pretty well here. It's not like Halloween where like Michael's stalking around the house and you know where he is and you know like what the danger is. This witch is just anywhere at all times. I'm like, I don't fully get her powers. But with that said, it's like a somewhat watchable film. So, you know, that's why it's at number 6 and not number 15. And coming into the top 5 is 2019's Pagan Warrior. Now, this film is also called Krampus the Viking, and it features a Viking Krampus going around after he's called on by a king who's been like ousted by a whole bunch of like evil Vikings. He then like gets a witch to help I don't know, like raise Krampus so that he can like attack these Vikings. But there's like some drama going on, and the acting is pretty well done. The Krampus suit is actually really nice. I love that Krampus design. It's really good. And you know, some of the scares and fight scenes actually worked pretty well. Now it's shot a little bit shoddily, but there are some scenes that look really good. I remember looking at them like, oh, that's a nice shot. That's a cool looking shot. That's a cool scene. But like then there's some scenes that I'm like, oh, maybe that was like the B team that did this part or something. But you know, for the most part, it's actually pretty watchable and enjoyable. So yeah, definitely maybe check this out. It is for free to watch on YouTube if you don't mind low budget stuff. There's a lot of comments on YouTube are kind of weird on these movies. They're like, wow, Hollywood doesn't make films like this, and this is really good or whatever. And it's like, yeah, of course Hollywood doesn't make films like this. This is shoddily shot and poorly paced, but it is actually somewhat fun in pieces, so you know, actually someone enjoyed it. And coming in number 4 is going to be A Christmas Horror Story from 2015. Now, this is an anthology film which does the trick-or-treat way of like anthologies. They are like kind of like bind it together by, in this case, Will Shatner is playing a radio DJ who like kind of connects everything up. He's kind of like the Crypt Keeper type character here. You know, it's actually pretty fun. There's a really fun sequence where Santa and Krampus face off, and the version of Krampus here is really cool looking. I really like the design, and I really like the Santa here. The guy who plays him is doing a really good job, and there is a twist at the end of this, and I think it's, you know, either you're gonna really like the twist or you're gonna hate it, but I think it's really cool. It's all pretty interesting stories, and I don't think there's like any particular story that I think is bad, but the best parts are definitely the Krampus stories, so I think it's, yeah, definitely worth checking out. And coming in 3rd place is going to be Rare Exports, A Christmas Tale, which I believe is a Finnish movie. For me, this is actually a really good film about like a father and a son, and them finding like a feral Santa in the woods, and then you realize that that's not actually Santa maybe, but they're actually in control of a big horned beast, which isn't really quite Krampus, but they refer to it as possibly actually being Santa himself, which I think is an interesting take on the character of, I don't know, like Santa. It's kind of like a melding of like a bunch of different like lore. Like there's like Krampus in there, there's Santa in there, and there is like a Finnish creature that's also like a goat-like character, which is like kind of like that as well. So it's all kind of like melded together. So it's not really quite a Krampus film, but it is actually a really good Christmas film. And you know, I wanted to include it in this Krampus evolution that I did because I can't think of any other movie or any other time that I would be able to like put that into an animation and have you guys like know about it, because it's actually a really good film and you guys should check it out. I don't want to spoil too much for you because it's really interesting. And coming into number 2 is going to be 2019's Sleigh Bells. Now this is actually a film that I thought I would like really dislike because it kind of like has these 3 cosplaying girls who have like a YouTube channel, and it's like sort of somewhat found footage at a little bit, bits of it. And I was going to be like, oh boy. This is like people who like trying to do what they think the Zoomers or Millennials are doing, and they're going to be out of touch. But the actual like 3 main leads here were actually pretty good, and I actually ended up like really enjoying their characters. And then their version of Santa here is actually one of the most interesting takes on Santa that I've seen in a film. He's kind of like a biker who's just like kind of like settled down in like this like small town. He's like kind of like somewhat retired. So yeah, it's like a pretty interesting take on a lot of the characters here, and like they kind of like go against the grain of what I was expecting. And with that said, they also like have a very feral, kind of like beast-like Krampus, who he doesn't like speak any words or anything, but he's like somehow psychically or connected somehow to Santa, and like their lives are like linked. So it does actually have like the Santa Krampus lore a little bit into it as well. And they also add in that like Krampus is like dating Mrs. Claus, who is like lost her mind and like is like tired of being in Santa's shadow. So there's like a lot of like fun like comedy going on here, and it's just like a nice easy watch. So it's like after watching like a dozen pretty bad Krampus films, this one was kind of like a breath of fresh air, and I was like, this is actually really good. And like it does have like a part where like Krampus is like making these like little hairballs that turn into like Krites almost, like little baby Krites. So that was like kind of, you know, like definitely like you can see the influence there for like the critters kind of thing. But you know, I really enjoyed this film. I think I should definitely check this one out. But with all of that said, the number one spot here has to go with the 2015's Krampus. Like, could there be another Krampus film that is better than this one? Maybe in the future, but so far like no one's given like a good budget to a Krampus film since this film, and you know, I would love to see them do like a sequel to this film or like a spin-off or something, because there's a lot of fun going on here, and I think like you can like have this Krampus appear in like different movies, because like his design here is really interesting. You don't really get to see what he actually looks like, but just like the way he presents himself, the way he's like hunched over, he's just like so beastly. And like the way they did the animatronic, and obviously there's a bit of like CGI to like help out with like some of the long shots here and like the tongue and whatnot, but like it's just like a really fun film. It's kind of like as if like they're definitely going for like a Christmas vacation vibe with the characters, who then get into like a horror movie kind of vibe. So there's like some interesting stuff going on here, and I really think the acting is actually amazing, especially after watching like a lot of these films here. The acting here was like, wow, this is good. And I actually saved this movie for very last, because I like knew I was gonna need like a pick-me-up after watching these like Tubi related films. So I was like, I'm gonna save this one for last, and I'm gonna watch it then. And I had seen maybe like bits and pieces of it back in the day, but I had never actually seen it in full. So I was actually really quite impressed by this movie, and I'm definitely probably gonna toss it on maybe like every other year for Christmas, and like maybe I'll watch it with my dad. He's really into Christmas and stuff, like when I go home or whatever. So yeah, you know, like it's a good film, and it's the best Krampus film we got so far. So definitely like put this one on. I definitely would suggest putting this one on, Sleigh Bells, Rare Exports, and A Christmas Horror Story if you're looking to just get like a little tasting of Krampus this year for Christmas, or whatever year for Christmas, or if you want to watch these after Christmas, you know, I'm not gonna judge you. So yeah, definitely like check these films out. The ones I mentioned, not the really bad ones. Do not check those out unless you're desperate for more Krampus material, because they are not good films. So what do you think of my list? I know a lot of people probably have never seen or heard of most of these, so I hope it helps you decide what to watch. Check out my new animation over on Animated covering Krampus, and before I sign off, I want to thank Ramos for joining the Patreon recently. If you want me to butcher your name, you know, check out the Patreon. Feel free to check the link down in the description if you'd like to support it and help grow the channel, and also the other channels. So get printable illustrations and infographics and other gobbledygook. So until next time, I'm Aaron, and I'll tell you something later.